into Hosea today. A couple weeks ago, we did kind of some background overview. We spent quite a bit of time talking about kind of the history of the nation of Israel, what was going on during the time of Hosea's prophecies here. At just kind of the ultra high level, we talked about how Hosea's ministry began under Jeroboam II. It was a time of great prosperity for the children of Israel. The nation of Israel itself, of course, it had been split. There was the northern kingdom of Israel. There was the southern kingdom of Judah. We tend to focus a lot on that southern kingdom of Judah because they're the ones that kept the line of kings from David. And as a result, they saw many more, although not all, they saw many more righteous kings than what the nation of Israel did. That northern kingdom, they really didn't get any of those. And so they were steeped in idolatry. They were steeped in idolatry. Despite this, and having a very wicked king in Jeroboam II, he was very prosperous. And the Lord said that, Scripture says that the Lord used him to save the children of Israel. And he expanded the borders of the kingdom to a very similar extent to what those borders had been during the times of David and Solomon, that kind of golden age of Israel. And so the people experienced great prosperity, but they were still steeped in idolatry. And in this kind of background, Hosea begins to minister to the people and to prophesy. It's pretty apparent that what we read about in the book of Hosea is not the entirety of Hosea's prophecies and ministry to the people of Israel. It's a particular portion of it that he wrote down and shared with us by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and that we get to read and understand and see today. Now, over the course of Hosea's life, the children of Israel will in fact go into captivity. So Hosea saw the fruition of the very prophecies he is making about the children of Israel, at least insofar as they experience God's judgment and they are dispersed and taken away into captivity. Today we're going to read through chapter 1, and we'll spend pretty much all of our time discussing chapter 1, which is really kind of the meat and potatoes narrative that we often focus on when we read about Hosea or when we think about Hosea. It tells the story of Hosea's family, of his marriage to Gomer, of the children that they have together, and the prophecies that are based on those children. So let's read Hosea chapter 1 together. The word of the Lord that came unto Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. The beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea. And the Lord said to Hosea, Go, take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bare him a son. And the Lord said unto him, Call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it shall come to pass at that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And she conceived again and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, Call her name Lo-ruhamah, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. But I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, and will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses, nor by horsemen. And when she had weaned Lo-ruhamah, she conceived and bare a son. Then said God, Call his name Lo-ammi, for ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, Ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, Ye are the sons of the living God. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together, and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land. for great shall be the day of Jezreel. In this passage, we get introduced to several different characters. This is a passage where our focus today is really going to be on names. There's lots of names, both of places and of people, and all of those names have bearing as we study out the book of Hosea. Of course, we're introduced to Hosea right out the gate. We titled the book that way, and it's his prophecy that the Lord gave to him, the word of the Lord by Hosea, as it says at the beginning of verse 2. But we're not given a lot of background about Hosea. There are other prophets that we are given some background on. We know that Amos was a shepherd, for example. We know that Isaiah, his family was in the aristocracy. He was related to the king, a cousin, if I recall correctly. And so that gives us a little bit of background understanding as to their social life and what they went through, where they were coming from as they spoke about things. We're not given that background with Hosea. We're given a little bit of family life and who he served under. But then we're immediately brought into what will be an analogy or a picture of the message that God is giving him through his marriage and his children. And so we're introduced to Gomer. Now, I said we would be talking about names and meanings. Hosea's name means salvation or a savior. And certainly that's emblematic of his picture in this story, right? As he will even represent God and Israel's relationship to God in this marriage. Gomer's name, in contrast, means consuming or wanting. And certainly in the context that she's introduced, that she is going to be a wife of whoredom, she is going to be unfaithful to her husband. The context here is clear that we're talking about a corrupt, consuming desire, wanting, a lustfulness that is emblematic of her role representing Israel as an unfaithful wife. Who gives to others what is due her husband, even as Israel gives worship to others that was due to God. Now we're introduced to this couple, and I spoke briefly about different views on the book of Hosea last time. We'll touch on this again toward the end of our lesson, but suffice it to say, this is a very literal marriage. This is a thing that happened that God told Hosea to do. And so these are literal people, and we see in the discussion of their family all the signs and natures of that. So God gives an instruction to Hosea. He marries this woman, Gomer, and it begins to tell us about the family that they have together here in Scripture. Each of their 3 children is associated with a prophecy, and God gives specific instructions on the namings of those children in connection with that prophecy. And so we begin in verse 3. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, which conceived and bare him a son. And the Lord said unto him, Call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it shall come to pass at that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Now, to understand this prophecy, we have to step back a little bit to that background. Jehu is the king that God used to put an end to the line of Jezebel and Ahab. Jezebel is the queen that was so wicked that her name is universally applied to wicked women. A wicked woman is a Jezebel because Jezebel, she fostered idolatry in Israel. She oversaw the murder of Naboth for his vineyard. That was in Jezreel. The city, Jezreel, was where Ahab's palace was, where he saw that vineyard and desired it. Jezreel was a major city in Israel, in Samaria, where the leadership was established there. And Jehu, he fulfilled the prophecies and commands of God in killing Jezebel. and bringing about an end to Ahab's line. Now, he did that, and God wanted that to happen. That was God's purpose in bringing him to power. Nonetheless, Jehu was a wicked king. He did not remove idolatry from the land. He furthered idolatry in the land. And he was a wicked king in his conduct afterwards. And so a prophecy was made against him that his line would not last beyond the 4th generation. We see another prophecy here through Hosea about Jezreel and how the end is coming. And that end would come with the assassination of Zechariah, who would be a king that would only last 6 months, and that was during Hosea's life. So he would see the end, the fulfillment of both this specific prophecy that was given to Hosea and other prophecies that were given to Jehu because of his wickedness as a king. Despite the fact that Jehu was used by God to rid the country of Ahab and Jezebel, because of his own wickedness, it's clear that he did so in his own self-interests rather than in service and in the interests of God. I wonder how often in life we get confused because things that we want happen to intersect with the will of God. I read something the other day. It was very providentially provided, Thursday evening actually, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it was to the effect of, rather than praying for the will of God, most people pray for God's approval of their will. In other words, how often do we go to God in prayer with a mind toward what we want to do anyway, and what we really want is not God's will to be done in our lives. What we really want is God to say, yes, go do the thing you want to do anyway. I suspect that is pretty often the case. Our tendency, our natural tendency as people, is to become complacent and comfortable in the way things are, to seek the face of God when we want something. And since we already want that something, it's pretty hard to kind of drain our mind of that and really and truly ask for God to do his will, rather than, God, I'm coming to you, either this bad thing has happened to me or this opportunity has presented itself. I really know what I want to do, so make it epically clear that I shouldn't do that thing or that this shouldn't come out that way, right? And what we're effectively doing is we're kind of putting our thumb on the scale, right? We're saying, Lord, I in lip service and desire, I want you to do whatever you want, but everything I view, everything that comes later, I'm going to view through the lens of, this is what I already want. I'm going to look for the approval where I can find it, and I'm probably going to kind of discount the things that seem to push against that. Have you ever been talking to someone about something that really excites you? You've gotten into it and you're like, man, this is a great idea. We should definitely do this thing. You know, I mentioned earlier about analogies that sometimes strike a little too close to home. Sometimes this happens with spouses, where one person gets excited about something and you start telling the other person about this great idea that you've had. And they're just such a wet blanket. You know, they start talking about, well, what about this? Did you think about that? How is this going to work? And your natural inclination is to be like, stop talking about that stuff. I didn't come to you so you could start telling me about all the problems with my grand plan. I came to you so you could tell me, yeah, Nelson, that's a great idea. We should definitely do that. And usually, sometimes, the other person isn't trying to be a wet blanket. They're really just looking at things like in a more objective way because they're not invested in it the way you are. So they're able to see things a little more clearly. But it doesn't feel that way when you're the person with the excited, great idea. It feels like they're being a wet blanket. Now, who's in the wrong in that situation? To the person with the great idea, it feels like the other person's in the wrong, right? They're just shooting down your great idea. They're only thinking of the negative, right? But to the person who's kind of objectively looking at things and going, okay, well, I mean, that could be a great idea, but how are you going to solve for this? They're just kind of thinking things through, like they're being a good spouse or friend, and thinking through things and providing some needed perspective. We do the same thing to God, right? We come to him with something we have already thought through and made our decision on. And all we really want is for them to approve, for God to approve and say, yeah, go and do this thing. That'll be great. I wonder how often in life we go through that exact process, and we go through with what we planned anyway, having paid lip service to God. Lord, you know, if I'm not supposed to do this, make sure it's really clear I'm not supposed to do this. And we go through it anyway, and it works out. Things go great. But it's not because God was blessing what we were doing. It's not because we had invoked the power of God on this event. It's because, like Jehu, what we wanted and what God wanted happened to intersect. And we come out of that experience saying, oh, look how God worked in this. And he worked through his will. He had done what he wanted done. But it's not because we were submitting ourselves to the Lord and desiring what God desires. It's because even a blind squirrel finds an acorn every once in a while. And we stumbled into doing what God wanted done. That shouldn't be the case for us Christians. Don't be like Jehu. Don't be someone who, yes, God accomplished great things and got rid of wicked Ahab and wicked Jezebel and used Jehu in the context of the prophecies he had given. But at the end of the day, everybody who looked around knew Jehu was not the man of God. Jehu was not serving the Lord with all his heart. Jehu was a person who happened to stumble into what God already had planned. That shouldn't be the case for us. We ought to be Spirit-led. We ought to be desiring the will of God before we go about to do a thing, before the opportunity has presented itself. We ought to be seeking God's face every day before there's the need about the specific thing. And then certainly, God brings things into our lives and we ought to seek God's face. But we shouldn't be opportunists in how we do so, like Jehu. All right, so back to Hosea. Hosea has had this child, this son, named Jezreel. Now, Jezreel has a couple of meanings, but the most obvious one in the context that God links up right here, right, is this reference to this city. It was the seat of power where Ahab and Jezebel were, where Jehu would be. And so he prophesies the coming end of the house of Jehu, as well as the decline of the kingdom of Israel. And we talked about a couple weeks ago how these things coincided in these end times of Israel, if you will. That after Jeroboam II, the leadership of Israel kind of falls off a cliff there. You go through several kings who are assassinated, who have very short reigns, and then the kings that do last a while tend to be kind of puppet governments for the Assyrians. They pay the Assyrians off to go away, and then surprisingly, just like Hezekiah will experience later, surprisingly, when the king comes with the big army and you give him a bunch of money, the peace doesn't last very long. He takes his money, he goes away, and then he comes back later wanting more. And surprise, you don't have any money to give him, so he comes and pillages the land anyway. And that's kind of what Israel goes through. So that's child one, Jezreel. Child two is born, and this is in verse 6. And she conceived again and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, call her name Lo-ruhamah, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. But I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, and will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses, nor by horsemen. Now the name Lo-ruhamah means not having obtained mercy. And so we see in that name, God again ties that name to the prophecy he's given. The child is named Lo-ruhamah, not having obtained mercy. And God says, I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel. And he contrasts that with the house of Judah. Israel, no mercy. Judah, they get mercy. And I will make it clear, he says, they won't be saved by their military strength. They will be saved by the Lord their God. Later on, as we read Hosea's prophecies and his warnings, the key theme across all of them is idolatry. We spoke a bit a couple weeks ago as part of this background, how when the kingdom was split, Jeroboam the first, not the king that Hosea lived under, but the first Jeroboam, he had a problem. The problem was that with the kingdom divided, the temple was in Jerusalem. And the people who worshiped God would go to the temple. He didn't want the people going to Judah and being under the presence of the Judean king, of the king of the line of David, in their worship of God. So what did he do? He formed a couple calves. He took a page out of Aaron's playbook. He built a couple of calves, and he placed them at the northern and southern ends of Israel and told the people to go worship there rather than the temple. He set up a false priesthood to serve the people in doing that. And he set up what I'll call the calf cult as an alternative to worshiping God as God had commanded. When you understand this background, it's clearer how the people became so steeped in idolatry. They were removed from both the temple and the priesthood that was to teach them the things of God. Well, now, the people of Judah, they had that constant exposure through the years. And despite having many shortcomings and stepping into idolatry, the people of Judah, they had the presence of the temple there, the presence of the priestly class, and a more godly line of kings to draw them toward him. So now we see in this prophecy, the children of Israel, the people of Israel of this northern kingdom, they have just crossed the lines. They have gone too far, and God warns them. He gives them a prophecy of punishment. Hey, your time has run out. Thank you so much. You have not obtained mercy of the Lord anymore, in contrast to the people of Judah, who do still have mercy. Now we know the rest of the story. We know that the people of Judah, they're going to go into their own captivity, but they're going to get somewhat more time before that happens because of their continued, or I'll say, slower slide into idolatry. And so this child is named Lo-ruhamah, not having obtained mercy. In selecting this name and this prophecy and judgment, God ties the meaning and the lack of mercy to their idolatry that has put them under judgment. Then child number 3 rolls around. It says in verse 8, now when she had weaned Lo-ruhamah, she conceived and bare a son. Then said God, call his name Lo-ammi, for ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered, and it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, this judgment that was just pronounced, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. In this prophecy, God combines one sentence of judgment, ye are not my people, you have been cast out, with a promise of restoration. Yes, you've been cast out. Yes, you have no longer obtained mercy. Yes, you are under judgment, but that will not always be the case. Despite your unfaithfulness, you shall see restoration in the future, because I, the Lord, am always faithful. And he promises a day where all of these things will come together. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together. There won't be two nations anymore. They'll be gathered together and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land. They'll be restored, if you will. For great shall be the day of Jezreel. A touch point back to that first prophecy. So you've got three children, three prophecies of judgment, and a culminating promise of restoration there. Now, the rest of the book of Hosea, really in chapters 2 and 3, we're going to talk a little bit more about the family. And then the rest of the book of Hosea is going to be prophecies based on these judgments that have been called down upon Israel and a warning to them. But throughout this chapter, the focus has been on the names of these children. As is so often the case, God tempers this final judgment with a vision of a glowing, prosperous future for Israel, one where they're truly prosperous and united in the worship of God. Now, I said this was a chapter of names and places. When we touched on the first judgment, the first prophecy here, we kind of glossed over the meaning of Jezreel, because the focus there was on its meaning as a city. God clearly in this prophecy tied what was happening in Hosea's life to the city Jezreel, where the judgment would be brought upon Jehu, where he had been involved with Jezebel, and this point of leadership within the northern kingdom. But the name itself, the name of the city, means the seed of God, the seed of God. In the overall view of Hosea, I had mentioned last week that it's subject to argument, I'll say, as to whether Gomer was faithful at the beginning of their marriage and became unfaithful, or whether this was the way things always were going in. And I elaborated my opinion that I think Gomer was faithful at first. I think the marriage started out in a picture of the way the marriage started out with God and Israel. That people were living by faith and serving the Lord, and they were the people of God. There's passages we could go back to in Jeremiah and Isaiah where God talks about his status as their husband and them having been faithful to him. And then I think in that same picture, Gomer became unfaithful. Gomer ceased to be the wife that she ought to have been. And part of the reason for my arguments around that are in these names. It would kind of break the picture if the first child that was born to Hosea was the seed of God, but was the result of her unfaithfulness. I also think it's worth noting that as each child is introduced, with Jezreel, in verse 3 it says that Gomer conceived and bare him a son. And with each of the next two children, you're not going to see that language. With Lo-Ruhamah, who hasn't obtained mercy, it says, she conceived again and bare a daughter. With Lo-Ammi, who is not my people, and I think has a very obvious twofold meaning there, we're told again, when she had weaned Lo-Ruhamah in verse 8, she conceived and bare a son. reasonable people can say, Nelson, you're stretching the story a little too far. If that's your persuasion, no harm, no foul. Be persuaded in your own mind in that regard. But I think there's a pretty reasonable argument here that child number 1 is Hosea's. Probably children 2 and 3 aren't. That things have changed in the marriage. Just as we see over time, Israel became increasingly unfaithful to the Lord their God, to their first spouse. The message of Hosea, I had kind of contrasted a couple weeks ago, Hosea to the book of Song of Solomon. Both of these are love stories, but one of them definitely is a rougher read than the other. Definitely not the same kind of joyful love story here as what we might see in Song of Solomon. Nonetheless, there's much for us to learn from, both in the prophecies that we see given and kind of that tangent we went on with Jehu and his service and his kind of circumstantial worship and service to God. But also in God's dealings with Hosea and with Gomer and with their family. Next week, we're going to study out chapters 2 and 3. We'll see what comes of Gomer's unfaithfulness and in Hosea's faithful love and desire for Gomer, despite her unfaithfulness to him. Through what God has brought into Hosea's life or allowed to happen in Hosea's life, we get a beautiful picture of God's own love for Israel and by proxy, God's love for us. Now, we'll often say we don't believe that Israel is the church. Those two things aren't necessarily interchangeable. But throughout the Old Testament, as we see promises of God given to the people of Israel, as we see God's dealings with the people of Israel, we are shown God's nature, and God himself does not change. And as we get insight into the mind and heart of God, we certainly see things that we can understand and apply in our own lives, in our individual lives today, both in God's dealings with us as individuals and with the church more generally. I'm excited to see what God has to teach us through the book of Hosea, and I pray that this will be a blessing for you as well. Let's close with a word of prayer.